This week's episode of the And She Looked Up podcast is brought to you by Fine Lime Illustrations. If you love quirky, colorful art transformed into fun, handmade stationery items, pretty much guaranteed to brighten somebody's day, that's just what you'll find in my new online shop at finelimeillustrations.com. That's fine as in I'm fine, lime as in the fruit, illustrations.com. Browse the entire collection or sign up for my email list to see some behind-the-scenes peeks into my studio. You'll also get first notice of new product launches and subscriber-only sales. And as an added little bonus, you'll also receive a free coloring sheet to help you relax and de-stress from your day. And now, on with the show. Welcome to the And She Looked Up podcast. Each week, we sit down with inspiring Canadian women who create for a living. We talk about their creative journeys and their best business tips, as well as the creative and business mindset issues all creative entrepreneurs struggle with. I'm your host, Melissa Hartfield, and after leaving a 20-year career in corporate retail, I've been happily self-employed for 12 years. I'm a graphic designer, an illustrator, and a multi-six-figure-a-year entrepreneur in the digital content space. This podcast is for the artists, the makers, and the creatives who want to find a way to make a living doing what they love. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the And She Looked Up podcast. As always, I'm your host, Melissa, and Heather Travis is back with me today for her regular pit stop on the show. Welcome, Heather.
Hey. Hello.
Hello. Hello, Heather. We are talking about big things today.
Yes.
Yes. So today's episode is going to be a bit of a mindset episode. It's going to be a bit of a boundary setting episode. And I'm hoping it's also going to be a bit of a practical tips episode. So that's a lot right there. And if you're wondering what we're going to be talking about, we are going to be diving into something that does not get discussed enough at all, particularly among women entrepreneurs and particularly among creative women entrepreneurs. I know when I first started out, this was a huge shock to me. I was not prepared for this at all, because nobody talks about it. And that is how to manage relationships that are less than supportive of the work that you do. Mm-hmm. And I think when we first start out, we think it's going to be all, follow your bliss. I hate that phrase.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can hashtag blessed.
Blessed, yes. And it's not like that. It's hard work, but it's also really shocking and upsetting when you run into situations where people who are close to you don't support the work that you do. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about the different ways that lack of support can show up, the different relationships we have in our lives and how support or lack of it can show up in them. And we're going to talk about some ways to deal with those situations. So everything from figuring out what the root cause of it is, to how to address it, to fixing it, and sometimes not fixing it. I think that's a big one. I think sometimes we wind up breaking up with friends. which is hard. We don't even talk about that very much, but I think for a lot of women, when we break up with a friend, it's as painful as breaking up with a romantic partner. So we're going to be talking about that. We're also going to be talking about putting some boundaries in place to manage some of this. Heather, is this something that has come up in your self-employment journey as a creative?
Oh my God. Okay. Big time. Big time. And in fact, I think the clearest example for me is the difference, my parents are divorced, your parents are divorced, but my parents have been divorced since I was 3.
Yeah.
They both remarried and so there's basically it's two, I jump between two entire families. There's two entities. There's a mom and a dad and siblings on both sides that I straddle both of them. And the difference in the reaction from each of my sets of parents is always very telling to me. And like, so as just a super recent example, and I know, Melissa, you and I are going to talk about it other episode, but I was awarded a Canada Council for the Arts grant, which is a huge deal.
Yes, congratulations. We alluded to this in the first episode of the season. We didn't know at the time if you got the grant, but for those of you wondering, Heather got the grant, so I got the grant. Super exciting. Congratulations.
Huge, like high fives all around, right? It's a huge deal. And I called my parents to tell them, and different I don't want to call either of them out necessarily, not that they listen to the podcast, but like my dad and stepmom were like jumping through the phone. They were so excited just because I was excited. They had no idea what it meant. And literally my dad was like, so now explain all this to me. Like, why am I jumping up and down? Which to me was like just the sweetest, most genuine.
That's what
like,
you hope for, right? Yeah.
Right? Like he was just happy because he could just hear the joy in my voice. Whereas when I told, and I was in person when I told my mother, and I was like, okay, that's good. Like literally it was like I told her I put my socks on that day, and she was like, yeah, and so. And like I sent an email to my stepdad letting him know I haven't heard back from him. So it's incredible the difference.
Yeah.
And that's just my parents, let alone friends. And I have come to, I think one of the biggest things, and we'll talk about it later in the episode, but it's my expectations around how I want specific people to show up for me. I have to get very clear at expressing. So my gallery show that's happening next year, I had to explicitly tell my parents, my mom and stepdad, that I expect, full stop, them to be there on the grand opening day. I have given them a full year's notice and said, I expect you to be there. And even that was like, well, we might have a golf trip booked. But my dad and stepmom were like, note to self, not traveling for an entire quarter because Heather's opening date could move, right? And so it's really interesting. Like the expectation to me, I think that's the big one, is that we all have expectations that our friends will support us in the capacities that we would support them, but they don't know that until we tell them. I think that's the big thing, right? Like your friends don't know to share that to something to Instagram. They don't know that that's important for your business until you tell them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think too, I mean, not to stick on parents, but I think that there's so many different ways. Being a creative, I think, is very different than being a lawyer or a dentist or right? And so supporting a friend in a creative way is very different. Like I have a friend who's an insurance agent. He's my insurance agent. I have other friends who are my insurance agents and they're not my insurance agent. And it's just because the one friend got to me first. Right. But it's not, I don't know. I think there's a difference in supporting your friends who do like a profession versus a creative outlet.
Yes. I think we're going to talk about that because I think that's a big,
I think that's a big one.
Big part of it.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for you, like big time, right? And I think for you, you've had a variety of businesses that are creative, right? I mean,
all my businesses have been creative. Yeah.
Exactly.
At their heart. I think when I first left I left a corporate job just like you did. It was a well-paying corporate job. It was a job that I think my parents were proud of. I traveled a lot for work. I did the things in that job that made it very easy for a parent to show it off, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, been there, done that. Yeah. Like you're LinkedIn, like she did this today and she did that today.
Right. Yeah. So, but I was utterly miserable the last 4 years that I was there, 4 or 5 years that I was there. So when I quit to become a graphic designer, and I had been going to school through all of this in order to become a graphic designer. So my parents knew that. Obviously, my parents are also divorced, and they knew that I wanted to leave long before I did. And I remember very distinctly when I finally made the decision. It was actually my dad had just had some major surgery, and I had kind of had to beg and plead to be allowed to work from home for a week so that I could be at the hospital and stuff and do the things that you need to do when somebody's gone through major surgery, right? And it was such a hassle, like, you know, and it was the Christmas holidays. It was just before Christmas, so there was nothing going on in our office, and it annoyed me. Like, it was just the little thing, right? And my dad woke up from a nap, and I was just sitting in his hospital room. He had a solo room for some reason. And he woke up and he just looked at me and he was like, "Hey," and I said, "Hey, Dad, I'm gonna put my notice in at work right after New Year's." And he was like, "Oh, that's good, but you should tell your mother first." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, I'll do that." And he went back to sleep. But and then I told my mom, and she was very excited. My mom was self-employed, so she gets it, right? But she was in a profession, though she wasn't. And then I told my brother, and he was like, "It's about freaking time." So like my immediate family, super supportive, and there's been some ups and downs with that over the last 12, 13 years, but overall they're very supportive. Yeah, but where I really struggled was in that first year. I lost one of my closest friends which was
like, it's it seems crazy that it's like really like it's not like you stole her dog. Or,
no,
do you know what I mean?
This is the thing, right? With families, we all have somebody in our family who's just whatever, like just whatever. Yep. you know, and there's that old cliche that you can choose your friends, but you're stuck with your family. And so I think when it's a friend, it cuts you closer to the bone because you know your family well enough that you probably have a pretty good idea of how they're going to react, right? Like, you know, and family are much more willing to be very just spew it all out how they're feeling with you, because there's no pretense, right? But with your friends, you know, these are the people that you have chosen to have in your life because you have formed a connection. They're the people that you trust and that you intuitively feel are going to be supportive of you. And then when that proves to be wrong, I think there's a grieving period because you've lost somebody that you're very close to. And it essentially was a breakup. Like, it really, really was. And so there's that grieving process, but there's also questioning yourself. It's like, well, did I really know this person? Did I make a bad choice being friends with this person? Or the flip side of that is, are they right? Like, maybe I'm not supposed to be doing this. This person knows me really well, and they're just kind of implying that I can't do this. So it messes with your head, right?
Oh my gosh, it totally does. Yes.
Interesting thing though, I went for lunch with this person a few years ago with some other friends, and you know how when you break up with somebody and you see them years again, you know, and you're devastated and it's just, and then you see them again, I don't know, 5-6 years later, and you exchange pleasantries, and then you go on your merry way and you're like, what did I ever, like, why was I with them? Like, why was I so upset again? You know? And that's kind of how it was. The two of us had just moved on in completely different directions, and, you know, good for her, good for me. And it really wasn't, but in the moment it was really upsetting. And
oh gosh,
I was not prepared for it.
I know. And I've been reading a lot, you know, friends come into your life, and I think people, relationships, all of those, they come in for, and some it's a short time, some it's a long time, some it's very intense, and I'm seeing that particularly as we sort of, you know, get older.
Expand our
it's
experience.
yes, exactly. And I'm, the people who come in and then leave again, I I sort of feel, and I know it might sound crass, but it's like, nope, I got what I needed out of that
Mm-hmm.
relationship. The
Yeah,
universe
definitely.
delivered. I drank that cup, and now I'm moving on. And it's not a bitterness or a sadness. It's just sort of like, that's
Yeah.
the way it is,
And I
you
think when
know?
you're younger, it's you don't have that experience to recognize.
No,
I think it's a little
no,
more raw. So,
yes,
uh, yeah, definitely some
yes.
big feelings going on there.
Yeah.
Um, so let's talk about the different ways that lack of support can show up. So there's the
Yeah.
obvious one, the outright overt, why are you doing
Yeah.
this? It's time to stop fooling around. You should get a
Yep.
real job. I don't think your work is that good.
Mm-hmm.
That's really obvious. It's hard to hear, but
Mm-hmm.
at least you know where that person stands, I guess.
Totally.
I'm trying to find one.
Totally. And now it's funny though, because it's interesting. We've talked a lot. Brian he's my husband, but he's also, my business is his business because we share complete
Mm-hmm.
finances. And so while my business is my business, he is my business partner, right?
Yeah.
And so every once in a while, I have to remind him to be my cheerleader first
Yeah.
and not the business partner,
Yeah.
because his immediate is go to, how is that making money? Where's the profit center on that? What are your
Yeah.
margins on it? I'm like, could you fucking just say yay you
Yeah,
for
that's a
a
cool
minute
idea.
before
That's a
you
cool
get to
idea.
the
Let's talk about
right?
it.
Exactly. Like, just acknowledge and be like, wow, interesting concept. Let's
Yeah.
pause and think about the financial implications, as opposed to, and it's like, you
Yes.
just need that little beginning part of the sentence anyway.
Sometimes he just
And
needs to
so,
be your husband, right?
yes. And I think that's the thing. I think that's part of clarifying the relationship, right? And so it's saying, what I need from you right now. And so now I have started to approach him. When I come to him with a question, I say to you, I'm coming to you with a husband fan. This is what I'm looking for from you. This is the person I'm coming to, as opposed to, I'm coming to the bookkeeper right now
Yeah.
with a finance question,
Yeah.
because then that helps him manage his, and he
Response.
doesn't have me being like, screw you, you're the worst, and like slamming my door, and I'm going to do it anyway, which,
Yes.
yeah.
And I think
So,
this is something we also learn as we get older, but you alluded to it earlier in the episode where um, these are the people who are closest to you in the world.
mhm,
You should have a fairly good idea of how they're going to respond.
totally. Yes.
And if you think it's not going to be in the way that you want it to be, like, you have to manage your expectations with different people, I
Yeah.
think.
Yes.
And that's not to say that I don't know how to quite word this, but just because people show their emotions and their support in different ways.
Yes.
And if you have a friend who just doesn't get excited about things, like, that's just not their default reaction,
Yeah.
you have to kind of expect that they're not going to get excited
Yes.
for you, or visibly excited for you. It doesn't mean they're not supportive, and people show support in different ways.
Mhm.
I it might be as simple as something, they never say a word about the work you do, but every time you release something, they buy.
Yes.
But they never send you a note saying, "Oh, good job," or
Mhm.
like, there's different ways. So I think you kind of have to be aware of.
And be aware, and also don't, I think this is the big one, is the assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a dear girlfriend who we've been friends since we were 7 years old. We see each other on a regular girls' weekend, but she's not on social media,
Mm-hmm.
and doesn't subscribe to newsletters, because there's a whole host of reasons why she doesn't. That's her reasons. But she told me, like, this is a woman who asks very interesting questions, probing questions, and then will say casually, "Oh, well, I visit your website every week to make sure that there's nothing new on it or to look at this.
Mm-hmm.
And that completely blew me out of the water. Like, she's never told me this.
Mm-hmm.
And then when she said it, she was like, well, of course I would. I'm your friend. I'm proud of you. And it was like, wow. And so I think that's the big thing for me, that I think of that all the time, is that she was doing something like that in her mind. She's like, of course I would. I'm your friend. I'm being supportive.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I didn't know about it doesn't mean it's not happening.
Yes.
I think
very
that's the
true.
big one that
Yeah.
really, because just because she didn't post about it on her Instagram or tag me or, post about it somewhere socially doesn't mean that she wasn't supporting me, telling somebody.
Support shows up in a lot of different
in
ways.
a lot of ways. And so I think that's the big one for me, is that everybody shows it differently.
Yeah.
And if I'm expecting something from someone, I need to be very clear about my expectations.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I am there's people who have
Yeah, absolutely.
disappointed.
You can't project your personality onto somebody else. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
No.
For sure. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, overt and outright lack of support are pretty easy to spot. But
Yes.
some of the others are not as easy to spot. One of and the first one is passive aggressive lack of support. So I kind of clarify this as the person says the right things, but they sabotage them with their actions. So the actions that they put out there don't support the words that are coming out of their mouth. And okay, let's just clarify this. Heather and I are not therapists. We're not psychologists. We're just two middle-aged women who've been around for a long time.
Yeah. Who probably need more therapy than we let on.
So
And
I'm just going to say, based on all the women I've talked to over the years and stuff, that very often the passive-aggressive support comes from your partner, your spouse or your partner. I see it all the time, very unfortunately. I don't necessarily think that partner or spouse is even cognizant that they're doing it sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But they do. And I think one of the things that I've learned as I've gotten older is that this sounds really horrible to say this about relationships, but I think all relationships have a power balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think whether it's your parents, whether it's your friends, whether it's your children, whether it's your partner, there is a power balance there. And ideally, in any good relationship, you want the power balance to be relatively equal. Like, there's going to be times where it shifts in one person's favor or the other.
Flow.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very normal. A great example is the relationship you have with your parents. When you're young, your parents are in charge. They wield all the power, and that shifts as you get older.
Yeah.
But I think that in a romantic long-term relationship, there can be a lot of power struggles that go on. And if you have a partner or spouse who is used to being the person that brings home the majority of the finances, the person who's the provider, in quotation marks, there can, when you are in a position to bring home your own money or to build something or grow something that has the potential to usurp that power, while that person that may not be able to necessarily articulate that that's what's happening, I think very often there's pushback because you're changing the nature of the relationship, and not everybody knows how to deal with that.
Yeah.
And so while they know that they need to say, oh, good for you, I'm so proud of you, they know to say all those things, their actions, subconsciously and consciously, I think both happen, don't necessarily support the words coming out of their mouth. And this is something when we ran Food Bloggers of Canada, we put on a big conference every year. It was a 3-day conference, always over a weekend, and the tickets were very expensive. And one of my areas of being in charge in the business was ticket sales and ticket refunds. And every single year, I would have 4 or 5 women who would ask to refund or sell their ticket because their husbands, and I'm just using the word husband here because they were all husbands in this instance, had basically pulled the rug out from under them at the last minute due to them having to travel for work, and my career comes first before your career. And it broke my heart every time it happened, because very often I could hear it in their voice, how upset they were, or I could read through the lines in the email. And some women it happened to more than once. Like, it would happen multiple years. And it just, it crushed me a little bit, because I don't know if they could see it. I think some of them could see it, but from the outside looking in, it was like, that's not fair. Like, this isn't something that just came up last week. Like, you've had this ticket for months, right?
Yes.
And so there would always be a reason why somebody else couldn't look after the kids, or, you know, and I'm sure that in 1 or 2 occasions, it was just people who just didn't want to come anymore, and they were using their partner as the scapegoat, which we do from time to time.
Sure.
But yeah, that's an example of where the actions don't meet the words. And that's not to say that sometimes things don't come up that are just completely unavoidable, but there are definitely times where, you know, if you're not given the opportunity to put the first foot out there, you're never going to be able to grow something. Like even if it means that, you know, it takes a hit from some other part of your life, like having somebody who won't even let you take that first step is a big challenge. And it means you're going to have some big conversations. Big
time. Yeah. And it's funny. I think, funny enough, one of the more overt expressions of passive aggressive support that I've seen was from actually a girlfriend of mine. I use the term girlfriend loosely, married to a friend anyway, but she would, it's interesting. You know that expression of be with people who would say your name in a crowded room, even when you're not there, whatever that expression is. Anyway, she was that person, but I realized whenever she brought me up and talked about, well, Heather's an artist now, and she would pause and use air quotes. and literally I was like, okay, that air quotes pisses me off. Like that, I'm not an air quotes artist. I'm an artist. And using the air quotes, it's sort of like, and I think we've talked about it once before, but I did friend very early on say, and how's your little art thing going? Right?
Word little. Remove that from your vocabulary if you're talking about a friend's business. Do not use the word little. Like, seriously, the friend that I broke up with, that was one of her go-to things. How's your little business doing? Yeah. It's just like, you know, I'm not the type of person to tell somebody to F off, but you say that to me, and that is going to be the first phrase that comes that I want to come out of my mouth. I'm going to be biting my tongue.
It's tricky because I think particularly for, you know, you and I have talked about this, and it's one of the questions that you ask everybody, you know, are you creative? Did you grow up creative? And a lot, particularly, I would say females, we come to art later, or come to our creative businesses later. It's not that the art wasn't always there or the creativity wasn't always there, but the desire to actually make this the full time, the I'm putting myself out there, it tends to come, at least in the women that I know, it's a later in life. Like, they don't graduate high school and they're like an artist in a studio and doing things, right? And
although I think younger women now are realizing that's a very real career path. I think when we were growing up, it was viewed as can you just get an education in something, a fallback, you know, like that. It was, So, but I think now more and more young women are realizing that creativity is a very valid career path, which is great.
Agree. But I still have people, and even when I was a home decor blogger, people, that was a business. Like I generated income from that. And in fact, made more money from that than I did my first year selling art. Like, you know, but people, oh, how's that? Heather's got a little blog. Heather's,
Yeah.
And it's that little word, but it's also
It's a tone.
It's the tone. And it's like she's just playing around,
Yes.
having some fun.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Funny enough, I'm working on a painting right now called Resentment Cake. And it's, and it's all the layers of resentment. And it's like, that's just one of them that's in there when people diminish my creativity as some sort of,
because it does build
byproduct.
up. It does build up.
Yeah.
You can only bite your tongue for so long before it just.
Yes.
And I think the last way that lack of support can show up is very subtle. It's where just somebody who's in your life regularly just doesn't support you with words or actions that you're aware of. And I think that happens. I definitely have some friends, some who are quite good, who never ask about my business, who never mention my business, who never, if I say something, they'll immediately change the subject to what's going on in their lives and stuff. And I've just kind of come to realize, like, that's just how those people are. And I have the choice of whether or not to keep them in my life. And yeah. So I think those are the three main ways that it shows up. And all three of those can show up with every different type of person in your life. But some of let's just talk about some of the ways that lack of support can show up in our most common relationships. So the first one is our immediate family. So this is like your parents and your siblings, but mostly your parents, I think.
Yes.
And this is, parents hopefully love us. But I think they also have a lot of fear around how we they want us to be successful. They want us to be self-sufficient. They want to make sure that when they're gone, we're not living in a box under a bridge somewhere, and we'll get into this about figuring out what the root cause of people's reaction to. But I think with parents, it's a lot of their emotions coming to the surface.
True. And I think too, I mean, a big one for me is that it's that resentment layer cake. It's all of the things that bothered me. Like it's therapy with Heather. All of the things that, for instance, bother me about the way my parents treat my siblings versus me come out in their expression of how they support my work versus their work.
There's nothing like your parents having a conversation with your parents that turns you into a 5-year-old. Like I have those moments where I just completely regress to being 5 years old and just having a temper tantrum because I'm not getting my way.
Completely. Oh my gosh. Yes. And I think part of it, like I'm now trying to come to the point where I'm like, okay, Heather, you either have another hard conversation, another one, in the hopes that they hear you this time, or move on, don't expect it anymore, and just leave it, because it's it's almost now, if I get the expression of support that I actually have been like literally screaming for, if I finally get it, I don't even know if I'll trust it, because I'll be like, I had to tell you 15 fucking times that this is what I wanted you to do.
It's interesting. Right? And I do also think, I have some friends who just have parents who have some narcissistic tendencies, and they are just never going to be that interested. Yeah. And like you said, you have a choice. You can accept that, or you can distance yourself from it. Yeah. And I think this is important to remember, is that some of these things can really hurt, but you also have to realize that you have the power in any relationship you're in, you have the power to make decisions about how you interact with that person.
Totally.
Yeah. One of the other big relationships we all have to deal with at some point. Deal with. I don't like using the phrase "deal with." It makes it sound like it's just like this chore that we gotta. I gotta deal with taking the trash out tonight.
Yeah.
But anyway, hopefully people understand what I'm trying to say here. But is your spouse or your partner, and I think in many ways this one can be the trickiest one.
Yes.
Because we talked about that ebb and flow, the power balance, and I remember having this conversation. So when I quit, I was with somebody for many years, but we had a split in the middle where we were not together. And that is actually when I started my business. So he wasn't around when I quit my job, but he was very instrumental in me going down that path.
Interesting.
Yes. So when we found each other again, and, he was incredibly supportive, and I really can't fault him in any way with that. But I do remember having this conversation with him, and it stuck out to me, and I can't remember what triggered it. But he said to me one day, "I feel like you don't need me." And I was so taken aback because I thought that's like so far from the truth. And it took a little dancing around to figure out that for him, the way that he showed how he cared about me and how he felt about me was to be the fixer. He was my fixer person. He wanted to help me solve my problems. He wanted to help me build things, and I consider myself a pretty independent, self-sufficient woman, and I'm quite happy being that way. And because I don't need somebody to do the quote unquote boy jobs and things like that he kind of viewed as his job, or because I don't necessarily need his help with certain things, he felt that he wasn't needed. And I didn't realize that. I didn't realize how much that was his language. Right. And so we wound up having a conversation about it. And I had to explain to him that what I need from you is the thing that I feel you give me, which is, you are the person who, when I've had a bad day, you pick me up, you dust me off, and you say, you're going to get him tomorrow. You are the person who listens when things suck. You are the person who gets excited when things are fantastic. Like you, and I need that. You're the only person who gives me that in the way that I need it. So I didn't realize my needs were being met, but his were not. And once he understood that he was needed, he just was needed in a way that he hadn't recognized. Like it worked out. We worked it out. It was all good. But I think this is the thing when you're with a partner, is that we all want to feel needed in our relationships, right? I think for some partners and spouses, for them, the way they feel needed is they are the one who financially provides, or they are the one who looks after the children, or they are the, everybody has a different way that they need to feel needed in their long-term relationships. And when that gets threatened, which is an ugly word, but we're at the end of the day,
change is threatening, right? And so if it shakes it up,
our brain automatically tries to suppress change. That's just what it does, right?
Yeah, so, or bring order to it, right?
When you come out of nowhere, and let's say you've been the stay-at-home mom, or you've been the one who works in the lower-paying job, but you pick up on a lot of the household things and stuff. When you suddenly come out and say, I'm going to start a business, that other person is going, wait, what? And their brain is frantically calculating all the things that can go wrong with this scenario, because that's what our brains do.
And immediately they're thinking, what does this mean for me?
Yes.
And that's not a bad thing. That's just the way we all think about it.
But it can be very easy for their defenses to come up. As small business owners, if you're in a relationship, you really need to involve your partner and spouse every step of the way. Even if you don't want them in the business, you don't want them making the decisions in the business, but you need to be having conversations about it, because a business is a big thing. And it impacts so much of your life together. It impacts your finances. It impacts your time together. It impacts your ability to do other things. And so, communication is so key. And if you're not communicating, the support meter is going to go into the red very quickly.
Yeah.
So,
Yes. And you know, it's funny, a couple of years ago when I had my very first like my art in a art show, and I was like standing next to it and selling it. It was like the first sort of the next major step for my art career
yeah.
was that outdoor art exhibition show, whatever. And I remember it was on a Saturday, which of course that's a busy day at the bike shop. It was in the summer, which of course is a busy day at the bike shop. And I remember in my head thinking, okay, how am I going to work the schedule? We only have one vehicle. Okay, I'll get Brian to work. I hope it's okay. I get him to work early so that I can then turn around with all the artwork and get blah, blah, blah. And I was trying to make all the logistics work. And I remember sitting down with him a couple days in advance and saying, okay, I think I figured out the logistics. Here's how I think it's going to work. And he looked at me dead eyed and he looked at me and he said, I'll help you set up. I thought I was always going to help you set up. And I said, well, what about the bike shop? And he said, I'll just open an hour late. This is a really big deal. I'll help you. And I was like, I'm even getting teared up now. I was like, oh, because he just looked at me. And I think for me, that the big show of support there was that he recognized how important it was. And while he had his business and something that's very important to him and frankly, our financial security while I was starting out my art business, that show of support and like complete, but of course I'll be there for you, was such an incredible. And then funny enough, the opposite end of the spectrum, because he was driving me there, I needed a lift home and my mother had planned on coming over. And so I said to her, would you mind making the timing work so that you come closer to the end of the show and help me tidy up and drive me home? And she did not realize how important that was, that she decided to spend time with my nephew and sent, like literally just randomly sent a sort of 6 degrees of separation person who happened to be in her vicinity. Like, would you mind doing me this favor and driving my daughter home? And so this stranger basically showed up to help me clean up my art show. And I can't even tell you, I sat in the passenger seat of that person's minivan with all my art in the back going home, just seething, like absolutely seething, because the day started with such a clear show of support. And then it ended with this, like, are you fucking kidding me moment, right? And I had sold all of this artwork in the middle, and it was this stranger who I was sitting there and like, that person, literally, I don't even know their name. They were like, and how did the day go for you? And I was like, it was great. I sold a bunch of artwork. Who the fuck are you? Like, it was such a weird, anyway, it really throws you for a loop. And both in the good ways and the bad.
We said this was going to be a deep episode, and it is. I think in some ways, some of the trickiest relationships to manage are actually friend relationships, because these can run the gamut. Like, you just don't know what you're going to get with each person.
Yes.
And I found that with my friends, is it just varies wildly. Like, wildly.
And it depends on what they do for a living too, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I find the ones who are closer to being in the creative sphere tend to see more the opportunities to be, I'll call it, overtly supportive, versus the friends who
small business friends tend to be the ones who have a better understanding of how you need to be supported, but yeah, with friends it can just run the gamut. One of the ones I was going to mention under passive, like a classic example of passive aggressive support, not support.
Yes,
because I experienced this one all over the place, and my mom can be a bit bad with this one too. I've had to, and she doesn't even realize she's doing it. And that is, well, so and so's home. They work from home, like, and just the calling you up, like, hey, can you go for lunch today?
Yes.
Hey, I'm in your area. Can I stop by? Hey, do you have time to talk? Like, just calling you in the middle of your workday, like, hey, how's it going? And wanting to chat. And I don't think a lot of them realize that is actually sabotaging your work.
Yes.
But it is. And sometimes we'll get into the laying boundaries in a minute, but sometimes you need to get pretty firm with that. And that's one where friends can, I found that was the biggest challenge with friends, was just having them understand that this is my job. I don't call you at the office between 9 and 5 right? Like, why are you expecting me anyways?
And I think too, funny enough, friends, and I've talked about it, doing things for people, feeding people, like acts of service are my love language. And so I have helped friends, paint rooms, redecorate things, all at no charge. And I would never consider charging for it. At the same time, when some people, they're like, oh, I would love and they're sort of angling that, well, because you're air quotes artsy, you could maybe whip this up for so and so's 7th birthday party. And I'm like, or you could pay somebody an actual artist fee, like and I think it's a difference. Like, I wouldn't just I have friends who are lawyers, I wouldn't just like call them for free legal advice because I know that they're a lawyer. You know what I mean? I think it's interesting when people have a talent that's like a doing talent as opposed to a thinking talent. People think that you're more willing to do it for free, which is a very interesting thing.
Yeah, it's like when you have a friend who works in like a big office building, you could ask them to go photocopy that giant textbook of yours because, hey, you're in an office with a big photocopier.
Yes.
That that's going to cost their business money and it could potentially cost them their job. Right? Yeah. So you don't ask. You don't. Because you don't want to put them in the position of getting in trouble. And So it's all very interesting.
And close friends too, it's a tricky one because we've talked about it in terms of you never know another business's finances. You don't know your friends' finances. And so I don't know, I have friends who, of course, they've never bought a painting of mine because they're quite expensive. And so their finances, like they're never buying a painting of mine. And,
I think this is really important. I do not ever gauge support by how much a friend spends on my work, ever. Because, first of all, I don't believe in buying things that you don't want. So, you know what? A friend can totally appreciate what I do and say it's cute and all that stuff, but it doesn't mean they want it. And if they don't want it, I don't want them cluttering their home with it.
Correct.
And on the flip side, maybe they just don't have spare cash to spend right now. But there's so many other ways you can support a friend who makes or creates without spending a dime.
And I think that's where we need to be explicit, though. Like, that's where it's like when a friend says, I can't afford to buy your painting, but how can I support you? That's when you need to turn around and be like, well, you could do this.
Tell your friends.
Tell a person to sign up for my newsletter. You could, right? Like, you can give them the list. And I think one of the things that we creatives have a hard time doing is actually asking for that.
I was just going to say, we need to ask more. And it's not just saying, can you share my stuff on social media? It's stuff like, okay, maybe you do have a big event this weekend and you're really looking forward to it. And maybe something does come up with your partner's job that is unavoidable. You can ask somebody to help out with your kids. I see this all the time with my friends who have kids. They don't want anybody else looking after the kids unless it's maybe their parents, and it's like, you're your own worst enemy. There's people out there who are more than happy to help you. You can pay a teenager to come look after your kid. Like, we did it all. My first job was looking after people's kids. Right? I did it from the age of 12 to 14. So and those kids all survived. I just want to point that out. They're all alive and functioning today. I didn't drop anyone. I didn't lose anybody.
Yes. And funny enough, I think too, I had this conversation with a girlfriend recently who said to me, she said, I'm so grateful that you were able to help me. And I said, I'm grateful you asked.
Yes.
Because
people don't know if you don't ask.
Exactly. So like, if you don't ask me for help, I don't know that you need it. And so
I just asked a friend. So I'm doing my first in-person show in November, and I'm beyond
so excited,
freaked out about it. I've never done one. I'm very introverted, so this is just it's just terror is going through my body even just talking about it.
You're gonna have a great time.
And I asked a girlfriend 2 weeks ago if she would come with me. She doesn't live particularly close. She's not way far away, but like she's not in the same city as me. And I was just, totally expecting a no. And she was like, I'd love to. Like, she was like, yeah, that sounds so fun. I love craft fairs. And I'm like, you don't have to do anything. You just have to sit next to me and be moral support. And she's like, oh, I'll come help you set up. Like, she was so into it. And I was just like, if I hadn't asked, I would never have known. Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, yes.
And I think that's super important, right? Asking, but then that person, I bet you they were like, thank you. I've been chomping at the bit for a way to serve you, and I can say yes to this. Please let me say yes to this. Like, I think that's the thing, is that by asking, we give people the actual opportunity.
We give them permission to help. We're saying yes. And I think sometimes, particularly if you're someone who does come across as very independent and self-sufficient, I think sometimes a lot of people just think you don't need help and they don't offer, and or they feel like they're going to get in your way, or you know, they don't want to step on your toes or things like that. And so when you actually come out and say, I need help, people are like, oh, well, why didn't you say so? Here I am.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm that person. And this comes from being the kid that jumped between two families, but I am completely independent and very independently resourcul, and very much.
I think that's a very Gen X trait too. You know, we were the latchkey kids. We just figured stuff out on our own. Yeah. Like, because there was nobody around to figure it out for us, right? And we also all survived. Well, most of us did anyway.
Totally. And yeah, exactly.
Let's get into some practical stuff here, like how we can deal with this. So I think one of the first things to do, and this is going to require a little work and effort on our part, which some of you may not want to do, but if a relationship's worth the effort, it's worth the work. So, and I think that is trying to figure out what the root cause of. There's a root cause behind all of this behavior. Totally. And sometimes it's not obvious. Sometimes it's super obvious, and sometimes it's not. And sometimes you just need to dig around a little. And I think, you know, when it comes to like our parents, I think we kind of alluded to some of the fears there. You know, they want to know that you can provide for yourself, that you're going to be okay. Yeah. And I think that's very common. And I think there's pretty easy ways to alleviate that fear. Yes. And, you know, it could be as simple as sitting them down and saying, like, hey, I've got an emergency fund set aside. Yeah. I have cleared all my debt. I expect this kind of, you know, like, just show them, like, you haven't just jumped into this blindly. Like, you've put some thought into it and you're prepared. Yeah. There's ways that you can deal with that. I think another one, and this can be cultural and generational, is a fear that you won't be successful and it will somehow reflect badly on them. And this is a tricky one. You know, we're talking about being creatives here, and I think that especially if you're the child of an immigrant, I think, which I am, and I think, you know, there's definitely, and not to say that my mom was like this, but there were things that were really important to her, like going to university and education. Education is so important to parents who have come from less than middle class backgrounds, or you know, and both my parents were very poor growing up. Education is huge to both of them, but there's that. But there's also, you know, you know, why aren't you becoming a lawyer? Why aren't you becoming a doctor? Why aren't you becoming you know, because they understand how those professions make money. And there's let's face it, you know, I have a mother who she's retired now, but she was a doctor. And the prestige that went around that when I was growing up. And my mom, I will never forget this. I went to school with a couple of, pretty much all the way through school, with a couple of guys whose fathers were doctors and were quite well known in the community. And my mom did not work under her married name. She worked in one city over, so not in our city. And she went out of her way to separate her children from her work. It was very important to her to keep us separate from that. And it used to really piss me off the way the teachers treated these boys whose dads were well-known doctors. I just felt like putting my hand up and saying, what the hell? My mom's a doctor. Like, look at me.
Yeah.
Like, it drove me nuts because there's this aura of being a doctor.
It's that, like, neither of my parents went to university. I was the first person to go to university, and it was, I would tell you, it wasn't just expected. It was like, just like the sun rises, Heather's going to university. Like,
you're going. Yeah.
There was no deciding no. Like, it was without exception. I was going.
This is why high school grad was. I didn't even go to my high school grad, my convocation, because I didn't even see the point of it, because I knew I was not done. Like, I was not done. Yeah. It's like going from grade 7 to grade 8, from elementary school to junior high.
Exactly.
I'm done grade 12. Now I'm going to university. Like, I just didn't get it. Because that's what the expectation was, for sure. Like 1,000%. Yeah. So I
think too, creativity with parents is a tricky one, because, it's hard for them to gauge. Like, my parents have a really hard time describing what I do. And literally, I'm like, just tell them I paint happy things. Like, I paint happy art.
Yeah, but that doesn't sound like a job, right? Like, does it sound like a job that you paint happy things? Exactly, that sounds cute. Yeah. It sounds cute. It sounds cute. Cute can't be a job, right? So there's just a lot of figuring out what's going on there, and showing them how this can be a real thing, explaining to them how you make money. Yes, I paint things, but this is how you make money painting things today. It's not just getting a drawer in a gallery. It's, you can sell prints, you can sell online, like, I can have an online shop. I can.
The finances one was a big one for my parents.
Yeah.
Finances. Like, when I really sat down and I'm like, this is how much money I have this year. And they were like, oh.
Another way to frame it is like, I'm not going to be a painter. I am going to be a small business owner who paints.
Yes.
Because a lot of parents really do have a lot of respect for entrepreneurship and owning a business. I mean, owning a business, like, I think all generations of parents can relate to having a relative who owned a business and did well with it. It might have been a dressmaking business or a corner store or something, but they knew it supported a family. Right. And that's what they want. They want to know that you can support yourself and any family that you may decide to have. So, Yes.
Actually, that's a really good point. And funny enough, I'm going to start changing the narrative on that. I'm a big one with words. And I quite frequently get asked, funny enough, by my parents, how are things going with your art, is the way they frame it. And I think I'm going to actually start correcting that language. How are things going with my business? My business is going really well. Yeah. Thank you for asking.
And you have a business. It's just a business where you happen to paint or draw or write novels or compose jingles or make sweaters or whatever. It's a business. You can knit sweaters.
But I think that's a big one.
And what's the difference between knitting a sweater and manufacturing a sweater?
Yeah.
Right? If you had a business that manufactured sweaters, nobody would blink an eye. So,
that's very true.
Another big one is jealousy. And this one can happen with any relationship you have. Yeah. It's a tough one to deal with, because if someone is jealous of you, that's their own internal issues, and you have no control over that. You can address it.
No.
You can have a conversation with them about it. But at the end of the day, there's really very little that you can do to change that around.
Yeah.
And I think that has been the toughest one to deal with my friends. I think all of them have had a little jealousy moment at somewhere. And it can pop up in different ways. It might be because you're doing what they wish they could do and feel they can't do.
Yes.
They feel trapped and not able to do. And maybe one of the ways you can help them is to show them how they could get untrapped. Like, it's not as hard as you might think. Yeah, so there can be so many reasons. They may wish that they were good at drawing or painting or whatever it is that you do. yeah. We kind of talked.
Also,
Go ahead.
no, I should. Jealousy for me, funny enough, came out in a conversation with a girlfriend who really, she was jealous of the public persona that I had put out there. That, and this, every time I say it, it sounds like it's like fake Heather online, but it's not. It's just there's just stuff that's behind the curtain because it's my life and not your business, right? And she saw that and was forgetting that there was a person behind it, and so she was jealous of my perceived freedom of time, my perceived freedom that I had in creativity, perceived financial lack of financial stresses. And so it was all perception. And part of that was, I don't, when I put myself out there, I put out the version that I aspire to be. And so I don't necessarily talk about the fact that I haven't had a great business year. I just talk about the fact that I did sell a commission because that was really exciting, right? And so I focus on, and she was only seeing that and dwelling on that and comparing it to the lack of her perceived freedoms in her life. And it was only when we literally had a conversation and I said to her, my life is much deeper than my Instagram. And also, I'm jealous of your life. You're jealous that I have freedom of time. I'm jealous that you have a kid falling asleep on your lap right now. Yeah. Right? So somebody can be jealous of something in somebody's life and it's no bearing, I think, on you. That's the big one. And that's a big one for me, is getting to the root of that one, because it's so easily remedied, right?
Yeah, I mean, I am one of those people who I actually find the hardest people to follow online are my close friends, because I know what's going on in the background and I know that's not being reflected in what's being shown. And so, to be really blunt, I often mute close friends just so I don't have to see it, because I'd rather be involved in their offline life than seeing their online life. And it's just, I know that my brain struggles with that. My brain really struggles with the disconnect. Of knowing what goes on. Yeah. And it's like the synapses don't connect. It's just like they short out.
And now, and what's interesting is, and I also, on sort of the flip side of this, is there's a few of my friends who quite literally think that following me on Instagram is keeping up with Heather, is checking in with Heather, is sharing
social media. And that's not how you keep up with close friends.
And again, this is my business. I post to social media for my business. I don't post so that, Jen knows that I'm okay. If you know what I mean? And so I think particularly if anybody who is listening to this, if you treat people's social media as like the carte blanche, this is how their life is, that's A, misinformed, but B, you need to sort of, if a friend is important enough to you to ask, you need to ask what's going on in the curtain and like check in on them. That's how, in terms of supporting my business, I want you to know that I'm more than my business, and I want you to support me outside of it in my life, not just watch my Instagram stories and tell everybody you think I make cute art.
I mean, I think it goes two ways. Like I know that I struggle with the disconnect, and so that's my problem. It's not my friend's problem,
right?
So it's on me to figure out a solution, and so that's my solution. I mute people, and I just make more of an effort to be involved offline with them. But that's another thing, is that if we as small business owners only choose to put out there a version of our business, it's also on us to remember our friends and reach out to them and say, hey, what's going on? You want to go grab a coffee or have a phone conversation? Like, you can't expect people to keep up with your life by following your social media if you're not showing your whole life on social media, right? Like, so I feel like there's a little onus on us as well to kind of know what our triggers are and figure out a way to address them. But also to, recognize that not everybody wants to be, like, social media is very toxic, right? So if our friends don't want to be on social media and they're not going to support us on social media, like, we need to respect that and figure out ways to connect outside of social
Totally.
media.
Totally.
So,
Yes.
and our friends need to do the same too. Like they need to recognize like, hey, if I'm not on social media because it's not good for my mental health, I also need to find other ways to connect with my friends. Like I can't just shrink into nothingness. So
Exactly.
yeah, so jealousy is a big one and it's a deep one. And we've done a whole episode on jealousy with Alana Ruoso, which I can put in the show notes because it's a good episode to listen to.
It's a good episode, yeah.
We kind of addressed this one earlier with one of my situations in that, the fear of not being needed, particularly if you do become successful. Like, I think that can bring up a lot of insecurities in your partner. I think there's also this, there can be this underlying thing like, well, if she becomes financially independent or people are singing her praises or she winds up talking to Oprah, like, is she really gonna want to be stuck with a guy like me or a woman like me or whoever your partner is, right? Like,
yeah,
it's a little insecurity that can happen there. And I think, again, you can't manage another person's insecurities for them.
No.
That's work they have to do on their own. But you can have conversations and you can have good communication. And it is, relationships are two-way streets, right? If you do have to let the person know how they're important to you and why they're important to you and stuff like that. So, we've talked about fear and perceived shifts in power balance and stuff like that. So how do you address these things? Like, we've touched on some of these as we've gone through, having some frank conversations with people. If you suspect something bigger is going on, continued good communication. And I think this is a big one because I think we all are a little bit guilty of this from time to time. Ensuring that your business doesn't become all consuming. Like, we need to remember that our business is not our entire life. We were just talking about this with the social media. And I think especially in the early stages of starting a business, it's very easy to just be like, oh, I just need to go work on this thing tonight because I want to get it out the door tomorrow. Or, and you have to remember there's other people in your life. And whether it's your partners, your parents, your kids, and they need you, right? As much as you need them. So, making time for them, making time for people who are important to you. That's important. And your friends too.
And making time for yourself, like doing things like exercising or going for a walk with the dog or just deep cleaning the bottom drawer of the fridge because that's what needs to get done that day, right? Like, the world is much bigger than your creative business. And so taking the time to acknowledge the things that are important and what need to get done. And part of that is the proactive relationship management, like proactive relationship management with your spouse, partner, friends, family, all of that.
It's really easy for us.
And it could just be reaching out.
Yeah, it's really easy for us to get all butt hurt because somebody's not supporting us. But you also need to take a really big step back and be like, have I supported them? It's a two-way street, right?
Big time. Big time. And in fact, that's a big one for me is because one of my big things is I'm trying really hard, Melissa. I'm trying really hard to not be this person as much as I was, but it's I would do that for them. Why don't they do it? And that's a really shitty way to approach it because my capacity in that moment to do X is very different than another person's capacity in their moment. And what does that moment look like for them? What are the things that are in their world? Maybe.
It's important to remember that there are seasons in life too. I mean, I think you and I both don't have kids. And so, sometimes it's easier for us to show up in certain situations than it is for our friends who do have kids. But, you know,
Yes.
our friends who have kids, they don't stay little forever. And
Yep.
this is something I've definitely noticed in the last few years. Most of my close friends had their kids very early. So now we're at the stage where they're all very close to finishing high school or are already in university. And so my friends are getting their lives back, and they are
Yes.
showing up. They're showing up far more
Yep.
than they could 7 or 8 years ago. 7 or 8 years
Yes.
is not a long time when you're talking about a kid growing up, right?
Yep. Yes.
So now they're showing up in a very different capacity than they were able to before. And so you just,
Yeah.
you know, you have to have some empathy for where other people are in their lives.
Yeah.
And,
Yes.
yeah. And I think in some cases, distancing yourself or going through an
Yes.
outright breakup with the person, partners and
Yep.
friends,
Yep.
is... I just hit my mic. I hope that didn't make a big noise.
No.
In those cases, I think sometimes that's the only option. You just,
Yes.
you know,
absolutely.
and that's okay. It's okay. It's
Totally.
not fun, and
No.
it can be sad, and it can have a lot of emotions tied up to it. But sometimes it's the best thing to do. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, and that for me, like, there's frank conversations, but there's only so many. And just to get back to my parents, you know, there's only so many times I'm willing to have that frank conversation. And then I'm like, you know what? You're just not hearing me.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm moving on, and I'm not going to spell it out for them that I'm moving on. I am just going to manage my expectations differently with them moving forward.
And that's a big part of it.
And it's a lot easier.
Yeah, sometimes you need to be the one to just be like, I have to stop expecting behavior that has never shown itself to happen. Right?
And that honestly for me, I was like, Heather, you're 44 years old. They have been doing this your whole life.
They're not going to change overnight.
Like, they're not going to change.
Yeah.
And so, right? And I mean, and that's fair. They're in their 70s. They don't need to change, right? And so, like, whatever. But I just need to come to terms with it. I think that's the thing. And look to the people. I think, and instead of looking, I think there's certain people, and I think, of course, it's like parents, but you look to them, and your expectation is that you will be my biggest cheerleader.
Yes.
And I think that this has been the lesson that I've learned in the past couple of years, is that your biggest cheerleader is probably not the person you thought it was, but they're out there. And that there's a lot of people who are your cheerleader, and it's just up to you to either find them or cultivate it or harness it, but they're there, and it just might not be your mom or your spouse.
Yeah.
And
or your
so
best
I
friend.
think and if it's not exactly, or your best friend, right? And if your spouse is not that person, then of course I think that's a bigger conversation. Not to say that Brian's my biggest cheerleader, but it's like, you know,
that's a tough one. Yeah. This is, you know, we're distilling it down into an hour and a bit, right? And this is us having dealt with this for over a decade. Yeah. And hopefully having this conversation can prepare some of you who are starting out, because it's going to happen. It happens to every single one of us. It's going to show up differently in everybody's lives. Yeah. And it's going to be different people in everybody's lives. And
even as your career evolves, right? Like at the beginning stages of a business and your creative business, what you need, the support that you need from your friends and family is going to be very different than if all of a sudden you have a product line of greeting cards that are sold at Indigo nationally. That the support that you're going to ask of them and need from them is going to evolve just like your business is. So I think that's the thing too, is that it's all, as your business grows and evolves and flows, so will the ways that you need to be supported.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
I think a lot of this comes down to setting boundaries, but maybe not in the way that you're used to setting boundaries. I mean, I think there's some very obvious boundaries in, like, the whole thing with, you know, when friends want you to pick up the phone in the middle of the day while you're trying to print out 300 copies of a print or something.
Yeah, like working for free and things like that.
Working for free, things like that. Wanting to go, you know, just just being disruptive in your workday, you know, that's an easy one to, well, I say it's easy, but I mean, it's an easy one to identify and know that you need to put a boundary in place and say, like, this is my workday. Yeah, right. But then I think there's other boundaries that you maybe are less obvious, or things we haven't maybe thought of as boundaries before, but that you need to put into place. And you can put boundaries in place with yourself. And you just kind of talked about it there, is when you recognize somebody's not going to change or show up in the way that you need them to, you need to put a boundary on yourself with how you interact with that person. Like, stop expecting them to show up the way you want them to show up. Okay. That's a boundary you put on yourself. They're not going to change. So I need to either walk away or deal with it somehow. And maybe dealing with it is, maybe you go to therapy, maybe you put distance between you and that person, like whatever, but it's a boundary that you're putting in place. And put boundaries on how you feel those emotions, or how you're going to allow those emotions to seep into your life. But I think there's lots of other positive ways that you can move past. Move past isn't really the right word. I don't want to use deal with it, but I guess
it just builds your support network.
Grow who you are and grow your business. And it is a support network. It's, you know, a great one for me that I found almost immediately is just seeking out other small business owners, not necessarily creatives. One of the best connections I made very early on was with a web developer that was a friend of a friend. And we were introduced to, I can't remember why we were introduced. He was to help me with something. Anyway, him and I, we were he was about a year ahead of me in the whole running his own business game. And he was just the perfect person to bounce ideas off of and have conversations with and stuff like that. And I was doing some web design as part of my graphic design work at the time, so it was a good connection. But seek out other women who own businesses too. It doesn't have to be just women, you know, but women tend to get what women deal with. Right. And
that's why I always loved, like, the Food Bloggers Conference, and I went to a lot of DIY and home blogger, home decor blogger conferences. I always loved those. One, because you were meeting a group of like-minded people, but two, it was like we were so singularly focused on the business that everything else, for me, the biggest, it was like I could sit in a room full of moms and not feel like an outsider, because we're all doing the same. We're all running home decor blogs. We're all online trying to figure out the Instagram algorithm. Like, we all have hurdles. We all have challenges. And I loved that. I think seeking out other small business owners online and offline is, like, cannot be undersold as how awesome and how empowering it is for your business.
Absolutely. Yeah. Finding other people who you can connect with and talk about challenges. And for me, it's my mastermind group. I love the women in my mastermind group, like, particularly after the last 2 weeks that I've had. Like, they have just come through with, like, some absolutely amazing advice and support. And I just I went from feeling completely defeated to being like, I got this. Right. And that's a gift that they give me, and that hopefully I'm able to give back to them. So I that's a great place to start, is you know, and if you don't know where to find other women who run businesses, go onto, like, even just like your local Facebook neighborhood community. Just put a post up and say, hey, I'm a woman, I run a small business from home, and I am just really looking to connect with some other women who are doing the same, and maybe meet up for coffee once a month, or a Zoom call once a month, or like whatever. Like, I just need to connect with some people who get what I do. And I guarantee you there will be, like, women who put their hand up and say, hey, I'm right here. Like, let's do it.
And I'll tell you, and this is like stepping outside your comfort zone. This is just a couple weeks ago, I had a gal, we follow each other on Instagram because we're both local small business, creative female entrepreneurs. I like what she does. She makes some pretty cool macrame. And there's like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon between all the people we know. So anyway, we follow each other. And there was a women in business networking event that was happening very close to us. And she sent me the link and was like, hey, I want to go to this. I also really want to meet you in person. Let's go together.
Oh, cool.
And I'll tell you, it was awesome because we solidified an online relationship offline.
Mm-hmm.
I went to an event and she said, if you weren't coming with me, I wasn't going to go. And I said, well, I'm so glad you invited me because I hadn't heard of it. And so we sat down in a room with 20 other women, and it was a really wonderful evening. But for me, the most impactful part of it was the courage that this young woman took to just say, hey, Heather, I know you on Instagram only, but I want to go to this event with you. And like, she picked me up. She came to my house, picked me up. We drove there and had a great dinner and drove home. And it was a fabulous evening. And how can you support yourself? Like, we're talking about friends and family supporting you. Supporting yourself
Mm-hmm.
by going and reaching out to those people, you'll find more support and you'll find more success, and I think more community because of it.
Definitely. Yeah. There's people out there who are just as, who are craving support as much as you are, and are just looking for their business bestie, which is a term I really don't like, but it goes with the whole girl boss thing, which I also don't like.
Yeah.
But it's a thing because it's something we're all out there looking for. We're just looking for that person. I mean, this is why I love talking with you every month. It's just like it's like a therapy session as well as a podcast episode.
Yes, but you hear somebody and you're like, I'm so simpatico with you. It's amazing. Like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize somebody else thought that way, felt that way.
Yeah.
And
another one is to find a mentor. Find somebody who's a few steps ahead of you, who can, help you through some of those bigger, who's been through some of these things and who can help you get through them on your own, and pay that forward, right?
Yes.
Be a mentor for somebody else who's coming up behind you. I think sometimes we get a little caught up in a scarcity mindset, just putting that out there.
Yeah.
And we start to think, well, I don't want to show them all my secrets, or they could become a competitor. You know what? We all need to get over that, because there's just so much out there going on that we need to stop doing that to other women.
Big time.
Yeah. So find yourself a mentor, somebody who can help you through those bigger moments. And, mentors can change as you move along on different paths and things like that. But I've had a few wonderful women in my life who have made a huge difference. And your mentor also doesn't have to be a woman. It can be a man.
Nope.
There's nothing wrong with that too. And we talked about networking, but you do need to get yourself out there. It's especially when you're starting out with a small business, and especially if your small business is just you and you're working from home, it can be so easy to get lonely and start to feel very insular and feel like nobody in the world understands your problems. And the truth is, there's lots of other small business owners out there feeling exactly the same way. So be the one to make the effort to network and get out there. And you don't have to like everybody.
Exactly.
I just want to throw that out there. You don't need to be best friends with everybody. You don't need to like everybody. But you're never going to find people you click with if you're just stuck at home in your office or your studio or your workspace. They're not going to show up at your doorstep. I guarantee you that. So I think also it's so much easier to show up in a supportive role for somebody when you do have that click for them, when you genuinely like what they do. Like, it's easy. I love what Heather does, so it's easy for me to tell people to go check her out because I think she's pretty cool, right? And the same with, a lot of the guests we've had on this show, they're on this show because I think what they do is really cool. So it's really easy for me to say, hey, you need to listen to this interview because this person is really cool.
That's exactly it.
So it makes it so much easier to be a cheerleader or to show up in whatever way you show up for these things.
Yes.
But yeah, absolutely. Expand your network, get out there, and show up for people. Be supportive of others in the way that you hope they'll be supportive of you, recognizing that not everybody supports everyone the same way, right?
Yes.
So,
yeah.
But you do have to show up and be supportive of others, and you can't expect it to be all about you. And I know sometimes as creatives, I'm just going to say this, sometimes as creatives, we think everything is all about us. We forget that there's other people around us. And I say
Hard truth from Melissa today.
And I may or may not have had moments like that. No, but I, like, in all seriously, I do think it is something that we very often, it's a pit we can easily fall into if we're not careful. And I do kind of have to, when I'm having a pity party, and we're all allowed to have pity parties, it's quite all right. You can have that. Indulge in it, feel it, and let it pass. And it can be very easy when you're in the middle of one of those pity parties to just be like, nobody loves my work. None of my friends care. Nobody, you know, and you have the sad fest. But it's really important to pull yourself out of it and say to yourself, so what have you done for other people this week? Right? Yeah.
That's a big one for me, is really turning it around.
If you haven't done anything to help serve other people this week, you need to go. This is why they've done all these studies with people who volunteer and give back to the community and how it impacts their physical and mental health. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why it impacts it in a positive way, because, you know, like when you get so insular and caught up in yourself, it's not good for it's not good for your head.
No, right? No kidding. I saw something on Instagram the other day, and it really hit me. It was a study that they had done. I'll see if I can find it after and send it to you, because it was really fascinating. But they had English professors in high school, and they gave the students, what they did was they gave the students feedback, their regular old feedback. And for 50% of the students, what they did was they had the teacher add the line, I'm giving you this feedback because I believe in you and believe you have potential.
Very powerful.
That was
words.
the line. So the feedback was the same. Yep. The feedback was the same. So even if they got an A, a B, a C, a D, whatever their grade was, the feedback was the same. And then half the class got that additional extra line. That's it. And the next year, all of the students who got that additional feedback they had excelled in English. And the students who hadn't been given that line did not excel. And it's not the feedback. It was the extra line that said, I'm giving you this feedback because I believe in you. Yeah. And I just thought, wow. And that, we all know, like, the power of the word thank you, right?
It costs you nothing.
And so that, like, how can you tell somebody, and I think as creatives, how can you tell somebody either, like, literally, I believe in you, or with your actions, how can you say I believe in you? Because that is really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you are listening to this and you're feeling like, nobody supports me in my life right now. Thanks, Heather and Melissa, for pointing out all the ways that people don't support me. Turn that around, and we did give you a whole bunch of action items to go out there and sort this. But at the same time, what have you done to support others this week? And if
or yourself, frankly. So
it needs to be both. You need to do both, right? Like, and we didn't really get into this too much. You alluded to it a little bit, Heather, but you need to support yourself as well. If you treat yourself like crap and you don't believe in yourself, why should anybody else?
Yeah. Right. And even the language you use, right? Like, this painting shit. No, it's maybe not that good.
Oh my goodness. I'm terrible at self-deprecation. It's one of my defense mechanisms. It's like, I don't know if this is any good, but what do you think? You know, like, you're putting it out there. Like, it's okay for you to say my work sucks because I think it might suck too. And so I have to, I'm getting better at it as I get older, but God, yes, that's a big one.
I know. That's a big one.
All right, everyone, we have gone well over the hour today, but this was a big topic, and it is one that doesn't get discussed very often. So I did want for us to make sure we could cover it properly. And it's so interesting. I was telling Heather before we came on the air, I had two very interesting conversations, two very interesting moments yesterday while I was prepping for this episode that dug into this even deeper. And I just thought it's like the universe coming together. And both of those conversations are actually going to be future episodes. So
perfect.
It'll be interesting to see how that goes. But yeah, this is all the feelings here.
Yeah. It's awfully ambitious of you, Melissa. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert. The word ambitious, my goodness, that is a trigger word. Holy smokes. Had a very interesting conversation with a past guest about this yesterday, and to the point where we were like, this needs to be an episode. You need to come back. And so we're going to have her back on the show in the new year. Cool. To talk about female ambition and why it's totally okay. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening this week. Heather, thank you so much for being here. If you are new to the show, you can find Heather on her website heatherlyntravis.com. That's Lynn with a Y, 2 N's and an E. And you can find her on Instagram at, oh God, I can never remember. Is it Heather Travis or Heather Lynn Travis? Why can I never remember?
Travis.
Heather Travis.
I'm Heather Travis. Yep.
Heather Travis on Instagram. And catch up with her there if you want to see all her very colorful, happy art, right?
Happy art.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you all very soon.
Toodaloo.
Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshелookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshелookedup.com or come say hi on Instagram at andshелookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.